A radiant young woman steps out of a car at a high society wedding. She wears a pristine white dress, smiling effortlessly as champagne is poured. It is September 1996, and to everyone present, she is the golden girl of Australian water polo, a dedicated athlete and a respected private school teacher. But just 3 hours earlier, she walked out of a local hospital holding a newborn, a child birthed in total secrecy. By the time the wedding reception began, the infant had vanished, never to be seen again. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. The coastal suburb of Manly sits just 10 miles from Sydney's bustling center. It is an affluent, sun-drenched enclave where social currency is heavily dictated by reputation, physical prowess, and success. In the mid-1990s, this community operated on a rigid hierarchy of respectability. At the very top of that social ladder stood Keli Lane. Born into a family that demanded excellence, her life was structured around intense discipline and public perception. Her father was a highly respected retired police inspector. In a household anchored by a former law enforcement officer, the boundaries of acceptable behavior were strictly defined. Success was expected, and public embarrassment was simply not an option. This environment bred a specific type of psychological armor. Keli learned early on how to project absolute perfection, regardless of the internal cost. By her early 20s, she had constructed a flawless public identity. She was a physical powerhouse, a fiercely competitive water polo player who dominated the pool. The sport itself is brutal and exhausting, requiring athletes to endure violent, breathless struggles beneath the water while maintaining a composed, upright posture above the surface. It was a dynamic that would soon define her entire existence. She spent hours training in frigid 60-degree Fahrenheit water, building a physique designed to absorb punishment and hide fatigue. Her talent was undeniable, placing her firmly on the trajectory for the upcoming 2000 Olympic Games. She was the athlete everyone admired, the one destined for national glory. Her ambition extended well beyond the water's edge. Keli cultivated a sterling professional reputation, securing a position as a physical education teacher at an exclusive private school. The role required her to be a paragon of virtue and responsibility to her teenage students. Parents trusted her. Teammates relied on her. Her father beamed with pride. She was the ultimate local success story. However, the architecture of this life was incredibly fragile. In the upper echelons of Manly's conservative society, an unplanned, out-of-wedlock pregnancy was viewed as a scandalous career ender. For an elite athlete, it meant immediate expulsion from the Olympic training squad and the sudden death of a lifelong dream. For a private school teacher, it guaranteed judgment, whispering parents, and a permanently tarnished reputation. For a police inspector's daughter, it meant becoming an object of pity rather than pride. The pressure to maintain the facade was suffocating. Keli had spent 2 decades building a monument to her own ambition, and the terror of watching it crumble dictated her every move. She developed an uncanny ability to compartmentalize her reality. When the immense stress of her hidden life began to mount, she simply locked the anxiety away behind a wide, photogenic smile. She became an expert at managing perceptions, manipulating angles, and steering conversations away from anything that threatened her image. Her body was her instrument, and she knew exactly how to control it. Broad shoulders, a solid 165-pound athletic frame, and the baggy, oversized tracksuits, typical of the era, provided the ultimate camouflage. She learned to endure unimaginable physical discomfort without a single grimace. The community saw only what she allowed them to see: a dedicated teacher and a fierce competitor heading for the Olympics. They never noticed the heavy, restrictive binding she wore under her uniform or the deliberate changes in her posture. The illusion was impenetrable, and it set the psychological stage for a series of catastrophic decisions that would eventually shatter her golden world. In the hyper-competitive social ecosystem she navigated, romantic partnerships functioned as an extension of personal branding. Enter Duncan Gillies. He was a prominent rugby union player, possessing the rugged athleticism and social standing that perfectly complemented her carefully curated public profile. Together, they looked like the ultimate power couple, 2 elite competitors dominating their respective arenas, moving seamlessly through the region's high society circles. but the relationship was inherently fractured. Both were fiercely dedicated to grueling training regimens, resulting in a dynamic that was often intermittent and distracted. This lack of constant day-to-day proximity provided the exact operational cover required to execute an unimaginable deception. The mechanics of hiding a full-term pregnancy are complex for an average person. For a competitive water polo player, it borders on biological impossibility. The sport requires athletes to wear tight, unyielding lycra swimsuits that cling to every contour of the body. Yet, as the months progressed and the physical reality of gestation set in, her psychological armor hardened. She developed a series of intricate physical and emotional tactics designed to gaslight everyone in her immediate orbit. When teammates noticed her thickening waistline or the sudden heaviness in her movements through the water, she had her answers ready. She explained the bulk away as the result of a new, intensive weightlifting regimen designed to build core strength. If a coach pointed out a sluggish lap time or a shortness of breath, it was swiftly attributed to overtraining or a temporary hormonal imbalance. She weaponized her own athletic dedication, using the extreme rigors of her sport as a convenient, impenetrable shield against scrutiny. Even her mother, a woman who lived in the exact same house, was successfully manipulated. When questioned about her changing shape, the response was swift and intensely defensive, a masterclass in emotional deflection that made the older woman feel intrusive for even asking. The athlete wore bulky tracksuits, layered sweatshirts, and tightly wound athletic tape to bind her abdomen. She learned to hold her breath and suck in her stomach when walking past mirrors or lingering in the communal locker rooms. The most terrifying aspect of this dual reality was navigating intimacy. Duncan remained a fixture in her life, completely oblivious to the biological transformation happening right in front of him. Maintaining a romantic relationship while hiding a third trimester bump required a staggering level of psychological compartmentalization. Intimacy was strictly controlled. The environment was meticulously managed. Lights remained off, and physical boundaries were artificially established under the guise of sports-related soreness or deep fatigue. Imagine the sheer mental endurance required to lie in bed next to a partner, feeling the unmistakable movement of a child kicking against your ribs, and remaining absolutely silent. She was living in a perpetual state of red alert. One misplaced hand, one unexpected embrace, one moment of vulnerability could cause the entire facade to collapse. The physical toll was agonizing. A body preparing for childbirth naturally softens, ligaments stretch, and the center of gravity drastically shifts. Yet she continued to dive into the aggressive, physically violent arena of competitive water polo. The sport demands athletes tread water using a relentless egg beater kick to stay afloat. She was performing this exhausting maneuver while carrying an extra 15 to 20 pounds of hidden weight. Opponents would kick, scratch, and pull underwater. She absorbed this blunt force trauma at 7, 8, and nearly 9 months pregnant, masking the excruciating pain of a changing body forced to perform at a championship standard. She was attempting to override her own biology through sheer force of will. This was not merely a young woman terrified of parental disappointment. It was a pathological commitment to an image. The child growing inside her was not perceived as a developing human entity, but rather as an existential threat to the life she had painstakingly built. Every extra pound was a severe liability. Every medical checkup she avoided was a calculated risk to keep the secret buried. She became a ghost in her own life, present in photographs and at local gatherings, but emotionally severed from reality. She attended weekend parties, drinking heavily to maintain the illusion of carefree normalcy, smiling brightly for the cameras while a hidden biological clock ticked down to an inevitable conclusion. The isolation must have been absolute. There was no confidant, no journal, no momentary lapse in the performance. The mask was permanently affixed. She had convinced her teammates she was just bulking up for the season. She had convinced her partner she was merely exhausted. Most chillingly, she had almost managed to convince herself that the biological reality could be neatly erased the moment it arrived. The architecture of her deception was flawless, setting the stage for a timeline of events that would defy all logic and basic human instinct. September 12th arrived with a chillingly calculated logistical shift. Manly was a fishbowl, a place where privacy was impossible. To execute the final phase of her concealment, the athlete required total anonymity. She drove 15 miles west to Auburn Hospital, a busy working-class facility deeply removed from her affluent northern beaches enclave. It was an entirely different demographic universe. No parents from her elite private school walked these corridors. No water polo teammates lived in this district. No one here knew the Golden Girl. She checked herself into the maternity ward completely alone. The physical trauma of labor commenced. For a woman conditioned to absorb blunt force trauma in a freezing pool, the agony of childbirth was simply another metric to manage, another physical threshold to conquer in silence. She utilized the exact same breathing techniques, the same stoic endurance that kept her afloat during a brutal match. Hours later, a healthy infant was born, a girl, weighing just over 7 pounds. She named her Tegan. For the next 48 hours, the sterile hospital room became a stage. The performance required a masterclass in psychological balance. She had to appear maternal enough to avoid raising clinical alarms, yet detached enough to facilitate an immediate, untraceable exit strategy. Nurses rotated through the ward, checking vitals, adjusting bassinet blankets. They observed a calm, highly articulate young woman who held her baby, fed her, and engaged in polite, unremarkable small talk. The sharp smell of iodine and bleached linen filled the small space. There were no tears. There were no hysterical breakdowns. There were no indicators of postpartum distress or panic. Hospital protocol dictated a mandatory consultation with a social worker to discuss the mother's discharge plan, particularly since she possessed no visible support system and had arrived unaccompanied. The athlete had her narrative meticulously prepared. She explained calmly that she could not keep the child due to the intense demands of her career and her rigid athletic commitments. It was a rational, pragmatic explanation that resonated with the busy medical staff. But she was not surrendering the baby to the state for adoption. Instead, she introduced a specific, crucial detail into the official record, a name that would haunt the investigation for decades. She stated the biological father was a man named Andrew Morris. According to the story she smoothly delivered to the social worker, Tegan was the result of a brief, casual affair. She claimed Morris had a stable partner, and they had collectively agreed to take full custody of the infant. It sounded like a modern, albeit messy, private arrangement. She provided an address and a phone number for this man, asserting that she would be handing the child over directly to him upon leaving the facility. The social worker listened, took notes, and found no immediate reason for intervention. The mother was, after all, a respected private school teacher. She was educated, composed, and seemingly acting in the child's best interest. The bureaucratic boxes were checked, the illusion held firm. Saturday, September 14th, the morning of the discharge. The hospital routine hummed along, breakfast trays clattering in the linoleum hallways, doctors completing their final rounds. She dressed the newborn in ordinary infant clothing. She packed her small duffel bag. The paperwork was signed, finalizing her release from medical care. Just before noon, she walked out of the maternity ward holding Tegan. The heavy automatic doors of Auburn Hospital slid open, and she stepped out into the bright spring sunlight. No one escorted her to a waiting vehicle. There was no clinical record of an infant car seat being inspected. She simply vanished into the sprawling suburban landscape. What happened next represents one of the most chilling black holes in modern criminal history. A 3-hour window of absolute silence. A 15-mile drive separated Auburn from the northern beaches. The route cut through dense urban sprawl, industrial zones, and crossed major waterways. In the passenger space, a 48-hour-old infant. Behind the wheel, a woman racing against a rigid social calendar. The pacing of her life left no room for hesitation. The athlete had to erase an entire human existence before mid-afternoon. There are no witnesses to this drive. No security cameras captured her pulling over into a secluded bushland, stopping by a commercial dumpster, or lingering near the dark, deep waters of the harbor. The environment was vast, and a 7-pound newborn requires terrifyingly little space to conceal. The mechanics of the disposal remain locked entirely inside her mind. Did the child cry? Was there a fracturing of the emotional armor? A final moment of maternal hesitation? Or was the act executed with the same ruthless, robotic efficiency she utilized to drown out the pain of an Olympic training session? A living, breathing girl entered that narrow corridor of time, and only a solitary woman emerged from the other side. The timeline was brutally tight. The pragmatic erasure of a life had to be completed swiftly because her presence was required elsewhere. By 3 p.m., she was back in her territory. The transition from maternity ward patient to high society wedding guest is a psychological leap that defies basic human comprehension. A woman 2 days postpartum is experiencing massive hormonal shifts, profound physical soreness, and active bleeding. Yet, she returned to her parents' house and methodically erased the hospital from her body. She stood in the shower, washing away the scent of antiseptic and newborn skin. She dried her hair. She carefully applied her makeup, masking the dark circles of a grueling labor with expensive cosmetics. Then, she slipped her body, a body that had just been torn open by childbirth, into a pristine, fitted white dress. The wedding reception was already in full swing. Sunlight glinted off crystal glasses on manicured lawns. She arrived exactly as expected. The golden girl. Her boyfriend, Duncan, was there. Her parents were mingling with friends. She waded into the crowd, accepting a cold glass of champagne. She smiled for the photographer. She laughed at jokes. She engaged in lighthearted banter about the upcoming water polo season. Not a single person in that affluent crowd suspected anything. No one noticed a wince of pain when she sat down. No one detected the physical trauma hidden beneath the white fabric. She stood on the manicured grass, surrounded by her tight-knit community, radiating the absolute picture of health and success. Less than 3 hours prior, she had walked out of a hospital with her own daughter. Now, sipping champagne, the baby was gone. The problem was solved. The calendar was clear. The facade remained entirely intact. The sunlit days bled into years. The 2000 Olympic Games were fast approaching, and her athletic regimen intensified. The heavy smell of chlorine, the echoing whistles in the aquatic center, the grueling burn of lactic acid. These were the grounding realities she clung to. The missing infant was entirely erased from the physical world. No birth announcements, no quiet questions from relatives, a complete, unblemished void. She compartmentalized the hospital incident so deeply that it barely registered as a memory. It was simply a logistical hurdle she had successfully cleared. But biological reality is stubborn, and paper trails are unforgiving. In 1999, the machinery of her secret life finally jammed. A dedicated social worker sat in a quiet, fluorescent-lit agency office, reviewing medical history files. The athlete was processing paperwork for a completely separate, subsequent adoption, another hidden pregnancy successfully carried to term. The state requires absolute transparency when relinquishing a child. The air in the archives was stale, humming with the low vibration of overhead vents. As the caseworker turned the crisp manila pages of the clinical record, a massive discrepancy glared back from the ink. Medical charts meticulously document every obstetric event. The file clearly indicated a previous live birth, a female infant delivered in the fall of 1996. The social worker typed the details into the state registry terminal. The blinking cursor returned a blank screen. Nothing. No adoption records, no foster care placements, no death certificate. The child existed solely as a sterile notation in a maternal health file, a phantom recorded in blue ink. Routine protocol dictates that any unaccounted minor in the system triggers an immediate inquiry. The caseworker contacted the mother, expecting a simple clerical error, perhaps an interstate move, or a private familial arrangement that had bypassed standard logging. When asked about the location of her firstborn daughter, the athlete did not hesitate. Her pulse remained steady. She seamlessly deployed the narrative she had constructed 3 years prior in the maternity ward. She stated firmly that the child was safe, living with her biological father. She provided the name again, Andrew Morris. The hunt for this man began as a standard welfare check and rapidly mutated into a baffling administrative nightmare. The contact number provided led to a deadline. The address was a transient, dilapidated apartment block where the paint peeled from the walls and no tenant recognized the name. Social workers expanded their radius, combing through electoral rolls, driver's license databases, and tax registries across the entire continent. The name was incredibly common, a purposeful stroke of deceptive genius. Investigators sifted through hundreds of men matching the description, cross-referencing locations and marital statuses. They knocked on doors from the affluent northern beaches to the gritty industrial suburbs. Each lead evaporated into the humid air. The man she described, a bank clerk who allegedly lived nearby, simply did not exist in the capacity she claimed. Under mounting pressure from increasingly suspicious authorities, her story began to mutate. The impenetrable armor showed hairline fractures. She claimed she had met the father through friends at a local pub, but could not name a single mutual acquaintance. She suggested they had a brief, passionate affair, yet could not recall exactly where they went, what he drank, or what kind of car he drove. The details were entirely devoid of texture or reality. Then, the name itself changed. Sitting in a stark interview room, she nonchalantly suggested that perhaps his last name was not Morris. It might have been Norris. Andrew Norris, this subtle, maddening pivot, forced investigators to start from scratch. The search parameters instantly doubled. The red herring was performing its intended function perfectly, mirroring the frantic, dead-end searches that plague complex cases. It consumed hundreds of hours of investigative manpower, draining state resources and stalling the momentum of the inquiry. She had sent the entire welfare apparatus chasing a shadow through a maze of paperwork. By late 1999, the Department of Community Services exhausted every administrative avenue. They realized they were not dealing with a misfiled custody arrangement. They were looking at a gaping hole where a 3-year-old girl should be. They officially referred the matter to the police. What began as a quiet welfare check transitioned into a formal missing persons investigation. Plainclothes detectives arrived at the affluent residence, piercing the bubble of respectability that had shielded the family for decades. The arrival of police in the manicured driveway sent immediate ripples of shock through the tight-knit neighborhood. Whispers began to circulate at the local rugby club. Her partner was blindsided, caught in a terrifying cognitive dissonance. The woman he shared a bed with was being investigated for a child he never knew existed. Investigators sat across from her, watching her demeanor closely. They noted the chilling absence of panic. A mother whose child cannot be located by the state should be terrified, demanding action, pleading for help. Instead, she was fiercely annoyed. She treated the seasoned detectives not as saviors looking for her daughter, but as bureaucratic pests interfering with her Olympic training schedule. She maintained the lie with a terrifying, hollow conviction. The child was with Andrew, and the police simply weren't looking hard enough. But the detectives understood the grim reality of the streets. Andrew Morris was a ghost, and ghosts do not raise children. Between 1992 and 1999, the Golden Girl of Manly had been pregnant 5 separate times. The scale of the deception was almost incomprehensible. 2 of these pregnancies were quietly terminated. 2 more resulted in full-term births and subsequent closed adoptions. Children handed over to the state with zero involvement or knowledge from her family. And then there was the 5th, the missing infant, Tegan. This was not an isolated panic response from a terrified young woman. This was a highly sophisticated, decade-long methodology. The physical discipline required to hide a full-term pregnancy once is monumental. To do it 5 times while competing in elite athletic brackets and wearing skin-tight lycra, it defied medical logic. Detectives systematically dismantled her social armor. They pulled her partner, Duncan Gillies, into an interrogation room. The rugged rugby union player sat beneath harsh fluorescent lights, staring blankly at the timeline the investigators laid out across the metal table. He was shown clinical charts proving the woman he slept next to had carried multiple children to term while they were intimately involved. He maintained absolute ignorance. The gaslighting had been so absolute, so meticulously managed, that he simply believed her athletic training was responsible for her fluctuating weight. Teammates, parents, and teaching colleagues echoed the exact same bewilderment. When the details of the investigation leaked into the affluent Northern Beaches community, the atmosphere mutated from shock to a deep, paranoid distrust. Whispers dominated the local clubs. If a respected physical education teacher could completely conceal 5 pregnancies and make an infant vanish without a trace, the fundamental fabric of their high society bubble was a lie. The community closed ranks, terrified of the scandal. Meanwhile, the crux of the police work, and the anchor dragging them into an administrative abyss, remained the hunt for the father, Andrew Morris, or Norris. A dedicated strike force was assembled to track down this phantom. It was the ultimate red herring, a smokescreen woven from a common name and a plausible modern custody arrangement. Investigators pulled electoral rolls for the entire country. They cross-referenced tax records, driver's licenses, and utility bills spanning thousands of miles. They subpoenaed bank statements and property leases in every surrounding suburb. Every single man bearing those names within a 10-year age bracket was located, background checked, and aggressively cleared. None had engaged in a brief affair with an elite athlete. None had taken custody of an infant in the fall of 1996. The task force chased shadows through bureaucratic archives for months. The frustration inside the precinct boiled over as thousands of state man-hours evaporated. It was a dead end deliberately constructed to buy the mother time. To prove premeditation, forensic accountants audited her life. They scoured credit card statements and bank logs from the months leading up to September 1996. They searched for a single receipt indicating maternal intent. There were no charges for a crib, no purchases of diapers, infant formula, or baby clothing. She had made absolutely zero logistical or financial preparations for bringing a child home. The absence of evidence became the core evidence of intent. As the nationwide search for the father collapsed, the pressure matrix entirely shifted onto the prime suspect. Police subjected her to grueling, hours-long interrogations. The audio recordings from these sessions are chilling in their emotional sterility. Detectives deployed every tactic in the manual, laying out the hospital logs, the contradictory timelines, the sheer impossibility of her narrative. She never cracked. She never screamed or broke down in tears. She simply sat with her arms crossed, radiating a cold, impenetrable stubbornness. When confronted with the undeniable fact that Andrew Morris did not exist, she did not waver. She calmly suggested the police were simply incompetent. She shifted the blame directly onto the state, insisting they were failing her daughter by not searching hard enough. Her narrative grew increasingly elaborate to fill the gaps exposed by detectives. She claimed she handed the infant over in a hospital parking lot, then amended it to a nearby street corner. The handover location shifted, the spelling of the father's name changed, the nature of their relationship mutated. But the central pillar of her defense remained immovable. She gave the baby to the biological father. Homicide detectives operate on a fundamental triad: body, weapon, scene. In this case, they possessed absolutely none. The infant had vanished into a brutal 3-hour window between Auburn Hospital and the Manly wedding reception. The route was heavily scoured. Police divers waded through the dark, freezing silt of the harbor and the murky currents of the Parramatta River, sweeping the depths for small remains. Cadaver dogs mapped the dense bushland along the highway corridor. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed at local municipal landfill sites. Nothing. Not a scrap of infant clothing. Not a hospital blanket. The earth had seemingly swallowed the child whole. Without a physical victim, proving murder requires an overwhelming avalanche of circumstantial evidence. Crown prosecutors knew that proving a mother lied to social workers was a minor offense. Proving she committed homicide without a drop of blood or a single eyewitness was a monumental legal gamble. So, they began building a case block by block, constructed entirely out of the mother's own lies. They charted her minute-by-minute movements. They documented her extreme motive, the impending Olympics, the pristine teaching career, the strict retired police father, the high-profile boyfriend. They established a clear, lethal pattern of treating her own fertility as a logistical problem to be covertly solved. Every hidden pregnancy, every adoption, every termination was presented as a precursor to the ultimate disposal. Yet, the investigation stalled, spun out, and rebooted repeatedly over the course of a grueling decade. The Golden Girl moved on with her life, securing new jobs, forming new relationships, effectively outswimming the law. For years, it seemed the facade would hold permanently. The authorities were paralyzed by a phantom father, a missing child, and a suspect who simply refused to break character. In 2010, the legal machinery finally cornered the former athlete. The Supreme Court trial was a high-wire act of circumstantial prosecution. The Crown had no physical remains, no murder weapon, no forensic crime scene. They possessed only the suffocating weight of her own deceptions. Prosecutors methodically dismantled the phantom father narrative. They painted a stark portrait of a woman who viewed her newborn not as a human being, but as an intolerable obstacle to her athletic ambitions and societal standing. The defense fought fiercely. They argued that handing an infant over to a secret lover was highly immoral, but it was certainly not murder. They hammered on the absent forensics, asserting you cannot convict someone of killing a child when you cannot definitively prove the child is dead. The jury deliberated for a grueling week. Ultimately, the foreman delivered the final crushing blow: guilty. The sentence was handed down, 18 years in a maximum security cell. The golden facade was instantly shattered. Recently enacted no body, no parole legislation firmly cemented her fate. The mandate is absolute. Until she breaks her silence and reveals the exact location of the remains, she will not breathe free air. The meticulous deception that once protected her is now the very thing keeping her locked in an 8x10 concrete cage. The pursuit of perfection is a dangerous obsession. For Keli Lane, a meticulously constructed public image demanded the ultimate sacrifice, a human life traded for athletic glory and social approval. She chose the pristine white dress over her own flesh and blood. Today, she sits in a sterile concrete cell, her Olympic dreams long extinguished, and somewhere out there, in the unforgiving expanse of the Australian margins, a little girl named Tegan remains lost. The facade held for a decade. The silence will last an eternity. Please like this video and share your thoughts about this case in the comments. Be sure to check out our previous videos as well. See you soon.